Billionaire saw a single dad return $50,000. Then she secretly followed him home. Odessa Vance watched the whole thing happen from across the lobby of the Aldrich Hotel. And for a moment, she genuinely believed she was hallucinating. She was 42 years old, the founder and CEO of Vance Capital, a private equity firm with more zeros attached to its holdings than she usually bothered counting, and she had just spent the last 40 minutes in a state of quiet, controlled panic that she would never have admitted to anyone. Her overnight bag, the black leather duffel she'd carried into the Aldrich that evening, packed hastily before a red-eye flight, containing $50,000 in cash meant for a private art acquisition she'd been keeping deliberately off the books, had gone missing somewhere between the valet and her suite. She'd retraced her steps twice, called security, was midway through composing the sentence in her head that would explain to her assistant, and eventually to her accountant, how she'd managed to misplace $50,000 like a set of car keys, when the revolving door at the hotel's entrance turned, and a man walked in carrying her bag. He set it on the front desk without ceremony. Still in his work jacket, dust and drywall residue faintly visible on his sleeves. "I found this in the loading dock behind the building," he told the young woman at the desk. "Must have fallen off a cart or something. There is a lot of cash in there. I didn't count it, but it's a lot. Figured somebody's probably losing their mind, looking for it." The desk clerk opened the bag, and even from across the lobby, Odessa saw her visibly startle at the sight of the banded stacks inside. The man's name, according to the ID he left with the front desk to log a formal report, was Callum Reese, 36 years old, a maintenance contractor who'd been doing overnight repair work on the hotel's loading dock, lighting a job that had, by sheer coincidence, put him exactly where the bag had tumbled off a luggage cart hours earlier. Unnoticed by anyone until Callum's flashlight caught the strap in the dark. He didn't know the bag belonged to Odessa Vance. He didn't know, standing at that desk at 11 at night in a hotel lobby dripping with chandeliers, he'd never be able to afford to look up at without feeling out of place, that the woman watching him from across the room owned roughly a third of the buildings on that particular street. He just knew that $50,000 wasn't his, and that somebody somewhere was probably sick with worry about it. He left his contact information with the front desk in case whoever it belonged to had questions. Declined the manager's offer of a reward on the spot. "Not why I brought it in," he said. Already halfway back out the door, tools slung over one shoulder, and walked out into the cold without waiting to see who claimed it. Odessa didn't approach him. She wasn't sure why. In the moment, some instinct told her that walking up to him right then, in front of hotel staff, revealing herself as the owner in a scene that would inevitably turn into some version of "let me reward you," would flatten something she'd just watched happen, for reasons that had nothing to do with being seen. Instead, she quietly retrieved her bag from the front desk, thanked the manager, and made a decision that surprised her almost as much as the bag's return had. She followed Callum's truck home. She kept a careful distance, telling herself the entire drive that this was reckless. Unlike her, the kind of thing that showed up in tabloid stories about billionaires with too much time and too little judgment. But some part of her, the part that had spent 18 years building a company, by trusting almost no one completely, the part that had grown so used to being valuable to people because of what she could offer them, that she'd nearly forgotten what it looked like when someone did the right thing expecting nothing back, needed to understand who this man actually was. Beyond a single grand gesture in a hotel lobby, Callum's truck pulled into the driveway of a modest single-story house on the edge of town. Porch light on, a sitter's car already parked at the curb. Odessa watched from half a block away as he walked inside, and a few minutes later, through a lit window, she saw him lift a small girl, maybe 6 or 7, into a hug so full and unguarded that Odessa felt something catch uncomfortably in her own chest. Watching a stranger's private tenderness through a stranger's window, like she had any right to it at all. She sat in her car for a long time after that, engine off, telling herself she should leave. She didn't. Callum Reese had been raising his daughter, Nora, alone for 3 years. Since his wife left in a departure so sudden and so thoroughly unexplained that Callum still, some nights, found himself replaying conversations, looking for a warning sign he'd missed. He worked 2 jobs most weeks. Day shifts doing general contracting, night shifts picking up hotel and commercial maintenance contracts through a small company he'd built himself. Because Nora's daycare and his mortgage didn't leave much room for anything less than relentless. He was tired in the specific, bone-deep way that single parents on tight margins are tired. And he had returned $50,000 in cash that night without a flicker of hesitation, despite the fact that it represented more money than he'd see in 2 years of double shifts combined. When Odessa finally worked up the nerve to knock on his door the following afternoon, Nora at school, Callum home between shifts, grease still under his fingernails. From an engine he'd been fixing on the side for extra cash, he opened the door with a confused, mildly wary expression of a man who didn't recognize the woman standing on his porch, and had no reason to expect good news from a stranger showing up unannounced. "Mr. Reese," Odessa said. "The bag you turned in last night, it was mine." Understanding dawned slowly on his face, followed almost immediately by something closer to embarrassment than pride. "Oh. Well, I'm glad it found its way back to you. You really didn't need to track me down for that." "I wanted to," Odessa said. "I also want to ask you something, if you have a few minutes." She sat at his kitchen table, cluttered with a child's homework folder, a half-finished puzzle, a calendar covered in the specific dense scheduling of a parent managing everything alone, and asked him, plainly, why he'd never hesitated. Callum considered the question longer than she expected. "Because the second I open that bag and think nobody would know," he said finally, "I become somebody I don't want Nora growing up watching. She doesn't know exactly what happened last night, but she'll ask about the truck being at the hotel so late, and I'll tell her the truth, because that's the whole point of doing it. If I can't explain it to my kid without flinching, I probably shouldn't do it." Odessa sat with that for a moment, thinking about how many people in her professional life, smart people, capable people, people who'd sat across boardroom tables from her negotiating deals worth infinitely more than $50,000 had never once organized their choices around a standard that simple. "I own the hotel you were working at last night," she said. "Vance Capital holds the building. I also run a private foundation that funds small business grants. And I'd like to talk to you about your contracting company, not as charity, but as an actual investment. If the numbers make sense, I looked at what little I could find about your business this morning. It's solid. It's just underfunded." Callum's expression shifted into something guarded. "I didn't bring that bag back hoping for anything like that." "I know," Odessa said. "That's exactly why I'm offering it." He turned her down twice before he said yes, not out of stubbornness, but out of a genuine, hard-won suspicion of anything that seemed too easy. A suspicion Odessa recognized because she carried a version of it herself, just aimed in the opposite direction, toward people who wanted things from her rather than people offering things freely. It took a third conversation and a due diligence process. Odessa insisted on running exactly the way she'd run it for any other investment. Real numbers, real terms. No favors baked in that would make Callum feel like he owed her something beyond a fair return before he finally agreed. The investment let Callum drop his night maintenance contracts entirely within 4 months, hire 2 employees, and take on the kind of larger contracting jobs that had always been financially out of reach. When he was one exhausted man juggling 2 jobs and a daughter's school pickup, it let him, for the first time in 3 years, be home most evenings instead of some. Odessa visited the house again, 8 months later, for Nora's 7th birthday party, an invitation Callum extended almost sheepishly. Unsure whether a woman who ran a company with a market value larger than the entire town's economy would want to spend a Saturday afternoon eating cake off paper plates in a backyard with a bounce house. She came anyway, sat on a lawn chair through 2 hours of a magician's mediocre card tricks, and found herself, at some point in the afternoon, laughing harder than she had in a boardroom in years. "Why'd you really follow me home that night?" Callum asked her later, once the party had wound down and Nora had fallen asleep on the couch in a sugar crash. Odessa considered the question honestly, the way she suspected he'd want her to. "Because I've spent 18 years surrounded by people who are impressive when someone's watching," she said. "I wanted to see what you were when you thought nobody was. And you were exactly the same," she said. That's rarer than you'd think. At my level of the world, Callum's contracting company is thriving. Now, a small, steady business built on the same principle he explained across his kitchen table. That first afternoon, do the thing you could explain to your kid without flinching. Odessa still checks in not as an investor exactly, though she remains one, but as something closer to a friend who found, in an unlikely doorway, a version of integrity she'd almost forgotten existed outside of principle and inside of practice. The $50,000 that started it all sits, these days, exactly where it was always meant to go into the private art acquisition Odessa had originally intended. A purchase that means considerably less to her now than the story of the man who handed it back without a second thought. In a hotel lobby at 11 o'clock on an ordinary night, expecting absolutely nothing in return. The end.